Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Ari Sachs of Congregation Beth Mordechai coming to another edition of this week's online Parashah class. This week we're looking at Parashat Terumah. In the second third of this week's Torah portion is a continuation of the first third in which it describes the building of the Tabernacle in very, very fine detail. And in the second third, we get more detail of the building of the creation of the coverings of the actual tabernacle, meaning the things that are on top of it. And if I can, there is a picture that I found online which may give at least a brief view of at least one artist's representation of what these cloths look like. As we see here, that you have the tabernacle that's underneath all of these different linens, all these different cloths which were on top, and they were all different kinds, made of all different materials. And in our in this second third, as it's describing it, it goes through how each of the sides are connected together to the poles, to all the machinery that needs to be placed in the ground for it to hold together these linens on top of the actual tabernacle. And so it describes it as a way of saying that the cloths are tied to one another. They're tied to each other, either on top or on the bottom. But the language that at least one of the verses uses it, I think, is really caught my eye as I was reading it. I want to share that with you right now. Chamesh hayiriot, this is verse 3 in chapter 26. Chamesh hayiriot tihiyena chovrot. 5 curtains shall be coupled together, isha el achota, one to another. V'chamesh yiriot chovrot isha el achota. And the other 5 curtains shall be coupled one to another. And so it seems from this particular verse that each of the linens are going to be tied together. But the language that really surprised me here was the language of achotah, meaning that the root of achotah is achot, meaning sister. And it surprised me because I wasn't expecting to get a particular person or kind of person used in describing an inanimate object. Rather, I would think I would see the word otah, which would refer to the other parts of the cloth in which it is tied together. Meaning that the phrase of a sister here, although it's obviously not used in that way, was surprising. Now, perhaps it's simply saying that you have 2 ends of a stick together. One, oh, this is the brother, this is the sister. They're connected together. That beautiful, very nice. That could be what it is. But it still just struck me that we have here an instance in which the Torah is deciding to use a word referring to a specific kind of person in describing this inanimate object. So it took a look at another instance in which this phrase isha el achotah, which, by the way, the word isha seems to mean woman, although that's not how it is here. Again, just kind of raised this verse in my consciousness as something that's very interesting to think about. And there is one other place in the Tanakh, in the Bible, in which this phrase isha el achotah is used. That happens to be in the prophet Ezekiel. So now we turn to the prophet Ezekiel. Just to back up, the prophet Ezekiel in the first chapter, in the first chapter of the prophet Ezekiel is experiencing a vision in which he sees some incredible divine image. I'm just going to read through very quickly before we get to our verse. Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Chabar, that the heavens were open and I saw visions of God. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of the king Jehoiachin's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of Chaldeans by the river of Chabar, and the hand of the Lord was there upon him. And I looked, and behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud, with a fire flashing up, so that a brightness was round about it, and out of the midst thereof as the color of electrum, out of the midst of the fire. And out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man, and every one had 4 faces, and every one of them had 4 wings, and their feet were straight, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. And they had the hands of a man under their wings on their 4 sides. And as for the faces and wings of them 4, I'm going to go to the Hebrew now. Chovrot isha el achota. Their wings were joined one to another. Kanfehem. Lo yisabu belechtan ish el ever panav yelechu. They turned not when they went every one straight forward. So this chovrot isha el achota is referring to how the wings, chovrot isha el achota kanfehem, that their wings, their kanafim, were joined together as one, meaning that each end of the wings seems to be connected. Interestingly enough, how that is represented in art, I think, comes about in 2 different ways, and I want to share that quickly with you. These are just 2 brief examples of how this idea of the wings being connected together is seen through art. We have here, these are the angels, these are the Cherubim, that their wings, as you can see, are extended to one another, as if they are touching each other, meaning that they're connected, to the next crew, to the next angel. But then you have here in this representation, you have the wings of each one individually connected to their, you could call it their sister's wings, meaning that the other half of the angel's wings are connected to one another, that they're not being reached out to the other angels. And at first I thought that was interesting in the sense that you have here 2 different kind of representations. One that's more social, more reaching out to the other, versus one that's more both internal in the sense it's reaching to its individual, to its partner, to the wing, to the other half of its wing, but also that it's directed up towards the heavens. And as such, that kind of idea of both reaching out and also reaching up seem to be unique in the sense that we don't necessarily know how these wings are connected. And you could say that in reaching out, that we are being asked to reach out to our fellow, in this case it's an angel, but you could see it as reaching out to a fellow individual, to someone who's on the outskirts of the community. And the other one is to kind of both in the sense of reaching inward, that we're connecting our wings together, we're trying to become more like one and connect ourselves up to the heavens. And so that idea of both reaching outward and also reaching inward and upward, I think is a really powerful idea of this sense of the sisterhood of wings, if you want to call it, that it's in that act of outreach. And then what's fascinating is in understanding how this idea of both reaching out and reaching in could be seen in a gendered context. Because coming back for a moment to our verse in Terumah, in our this week's Torah portion, the medieval French commentator Rashi says that really this term of achotah is nothing special. It's just the way the Hebrew is written. It's just the Lashon Kodesh. It's just how Hebrew is. And he brings up another example, which is interesting. He brings up the example in the previous chapter, which is still in our Torah portion, though in the first third. He brings up an example in which male-centered language, particularly around the term ach, around brother, is used. And for that, I want to turn again to sefaria.org. To look at this particular verse. Vehayu hakeruvim, and these were the cherubim, porsei chenafim, that they spread their wings lemala, up above. Sochechim bechanfehem al hakaporet, and by doing so, they screened the ark cover with their wings. Ufnehem ish el achiv, and their faces were faced one to the other. El hakaporet, to the ark cover. Yehiyu pinei hakruvim, were the Kruvim's faces, meaning that their faces were directed. Come back to me. That they were faced towards each other with the ark cover being between them, and so they were each facing the ark cover, but also facing themselves. And the way that again, this is only one example of how it's seen in art. Is like this. Now, these happen to be just from looking at it, seem to be more feminine, but at the same time, that it is their pair of faces facing one another. You can also see that their wings, in many ways, are facing one another. But that this act of the panim el achiv, of facing one another, is described in male-centered language, as in the sense of the word ach. Now, as one side point on that, the Eitz Chaim Chumash translates this idea of one face facing another as using the term confront, that one face confronts one another. Now, on the outset, that translation simply could be saying that one face is in direct opposite of the other face, but you could also see it in another sense, meaning in another way that the term confront is used, is standing in opposition of, or is standing adversarially against the other. That when one is face to face with the other person, in one sense, we are acting aggressively against the other person. Thinking about sitting in a boardroom, or if you like to play hockey, thinking of the term face-off. You stand one in front of the other, and then you're both trying to get after the puck. And I think that coming back to the sense of the wings as being spread out, as reaching out to others both inwards and upwards, as that sense of bringing in, that is described in a female sense, meaning using the term achot, that the male sense seems to be using in the sense of confrontation, which can feed into this gendered stereotype that women are people who reach out, who try to bring people in, try to connect those who are to connect people together, as opposed to men who spend more time not in bringing people together, but in confronting one another. So is that a part of the gendered language that's going on here? And interestingly enough, the Kruvim are not only have these terms of the wings that are used as a feminine, or that their faces are used in a male sense, but also that they are described as being both male and female. And in that way, that this question of how they are both male and female is of very important significance, because how can these angelic creatures be both male and female? What does that actually mean? And so then we get to an interesting commentary by another medieval commentator known as the Sforno. And what I'm going to share from Sforno, it's a wonderful translation shared to us by an anonymous writer on sefaria.org, which not only has these great texts, but also provides some translations as well. And Sforno says the following. The sages already explained that these Cherubim, these cherubs, had the faces of a young boy and a young girl, meaning that they looked the same. A reference to the initiation of actions originating in a domain which is part of the abstract world. What is initiated there resembles something masculine, meaning that which comes from on high, that which comes from the divine world, which is brought down, that is a masculine act. Why? As the male is symbolic of initiating matters, whereas the female's role is more responsive in nature, meaning to receive that, that kind of initiation. And so what the Sforno is doing is truly adding a gendered sense to what the Cherubim are doing, in the sense that the Cherubim in its male form is allowing the divine force to come down. Pardon me for one moment. Is that the male sense is the one that brings it on high. Apologize. Apologize for that interruption. And so the Cherubim represent both of those different aspects, but one as particularly male in the sense of initiating that kind of drawdown from on high, versus the female act of receiving. And that kind of language, I think, can create a very troubling dynamic in trying to understand this text. Meaning, anytime that we read a text that has gendered language, and Hebrew is a gendered language, every single word is either male or female, does it mean that it has these stereotypical definitions of male initiation and female reception? And that's where I actually want to bring, some one other text, which is the text, at least it seems, is the text that the Sforno quotes from the Gemara, from Masechet Yoma, in which it describes the Cherubim, it describes the cherubs as having both a male and female face. And I think it gives us something a little bit more to hold on to in terms of the positive potential of describing terms in gendered language. Rav Katina said, whenever Israel came up to the festival, the curtain would be removed for them, and the cherubim were shown to them, whose bodies were intertwisted with one another. And they would be thus addressed, look, you are beloved before God as the love between man and woman. And I think that what this is saying is that, yes, the Torah has gendered language, has this achot, has this ach, that it is describing things in terms of that dualistic nature in regards to both male and female, and sometimes they seem to be of opposite of one another in some capacity. And it also means, by the way, that from the perspective of the Torah, understanding something as being unified, understanding life as being just male or just female is not a part of its language, but rather that the male and female aspects of the Torah are meant to be unified, that they are meant to come together in a way of bringing us to be whole. And from this particular text in Yoma, it is not clear exactly what aspects are male and female, but rather that male and female are there together. That is to say that there can be something that is quote unquote male, something is quote unquote female, that we would normally associate in one way, but actually comes to us in a very different form. That is to say, someone who is male has a feminine side, someone who is female has a male side. Then in our relationships, we might describe something as male, describe something as female, without it actually coming from the person who is of that particular sex, not alone gender. And so what this gendered language intimates is that there are all these different kinds of ways of describing who we are and what we do. And that we need that kind of gendered that gendered language in order to describe all the different incredible aspects of life, but that at the end of the day, we may not know exactly where the male sense comes from, where the female sense comes from, and that what we're trying to do is that wherever it comes from, wherever we get what we would feel is to be male and what we would feel to be as female, wherever that will come from, it eventually comes together on the face of the cherubim as united, as intertwined as one. And that we should feel both, I think, in ourselves and also in our relationships with one another, that we are whole. Because that's where the union really comes in. That the union between male and female is meant to make us feel as if we are complete, as if we are one. That our reaching out to our brothers and sisters will help us make us feel closer to ourselves. That reaching inward and upward will help us give us a clearer sense as to where it is that we're going. That in all of our actions, we are trying to unify all the different elements around us, regardless of whether you call them male and female, not worrying where each emanates from, but saying that the world is full of incredible diversity, and trying to bring that diversity into ourselves, bringing that male, that female into us, and creating that oneness. And so my hope for this Shabbat is that you take this message of hope for the value of gendered language to help us discover unification of ourselves, to help us understand what it means to be whole, as we bring in this day that is meant to fulfill us, is meant to give us a sense of shalom, which comes from the root shalem, meaning complete, meaning whole. Shabbat shalom and take care. Bye-bye.